Hello and welcome to episode 7 of Sloan the Record, recording on January 23rd, releasing on February 2nd, 2025. My name is Nathan Sloan and I'm joined by my father, Ron. Each week, we're going on the record about family history, past and present. Along the way, we'll see if we can't learn more about the people, traditions, values, and stories that made us, all while opening a window for everyone else to see a slice of life in rural North Carolina. New episodes are published on Sundays, and we appreciate every listener. You can make sure that you catch each episode by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or Podbean. Just search Sloan the Record. Hi, Dad.
Hey.
There's a delay there. Hey, this is Nathan in the edit. I just wanted to drop in and make a note that there's some technical glitches in this episode, and especially around the 18-minute mark when we're talking about the cow, you may hear some starts and stops, and there are just some other weird things like delays and pops in the audio. I didn't want to re-record this because honestly, it ends up being one of my favorite episodes we've recorded so far. So thanks for bearing with us. I promise it's worth it. This is the same day that we recorded last week's episode, so we're recording on the 23rd, and I appreciate you being willing to do a double episode with me, because that does buy me a little bit of a window so that when baby comes, I don't have to record an episode that week. So that is coming up very quickly, less than 2 weeks away from our baby's due date. So that's exciting. And once the baby does come, we will try to get back on a regular schedule where we record the episodes the same week that we release them. But thanks for bearing with us as we make an adjustment here to make this possible. So last week we talked about the 1950s for Dad. That was elementary school. That was all the kind of memories of Broadway you packed in there into that episode. This time we're looking at the 1960s, and that would be middle school and high school for the most part. So, toward the end of that decade, you went to college, I know, 1960s, but we're going to have an episode next week that we'll go into ECU and college life. So I think we want to probably just focus on the middle school and high school years. And when I look back at my own middle and high school years, the things that stick out to me the most are the people that I interacted with the most at school, whether that be teachers that had a meaningful impact on me, or coaches, or I didn't have any coaches, but I had a music teacher. It could be family members that took time with you, whether that's uncles or other relatives, cousins. So that's kind of, if last year we were looking more at the general picture, or not last year, last week we were looking at a general picture of the 1950s. Hopefully the questions that we will go through this week will lead you more to talking a little bit about people who helped you in that kind of coming of age, middle school, high school years, finding your footing, figuring out what it was you wanted to do and be. So to get things started, what do you remember about middle school in general?
Middle school, I guess, is 6th to 8th grade. It was kind of an upheaval for me because at the age of 12, my parents decided, as I mentioned, we had a little 2-bedroom house. And I was to find out later that year that I turned 12, went into the 6th grade, that my mother was expecting again. So I guess that prompted my dad to decide to build a house down on the farm, which was on Route 3 Lillington, down near where we went to church, and the school there would be Boone Trail that you mentioned in an earlier episode. So it was traumatic for me initially, because I remember my friend James Bryan Creech one time said, "I despise change. I hate to even change socks." But he was joking, but I related to him because I didn't want a new house. I didn't want to move somewhere else. I didn't want to leave the little neighborhood I was in there at Broadway. I loved it. It was all that I knew. And I remembered, like Christmas mornings when we were there at Broadway, all the neighborhood kids would all run to each other's houses to see what they got for Christmas and things like that. It was that little closeness, And we moved to the farm where you could see neighbors' houses, but it wasn't like it was at Broadway. And of course, you're coming into a new school, and you're the new kid. And sixth grade for me, it was an awkward time because it's when you're first become a little bit self-conscious, I think. Guys are noticing girls suddenly, and girls are noticing guys, and the guys ain't real happy about another guy coming in that the girls are noticing because he's new and different. And all of that didn't go the smoothest in the world, but it all worked out. And along that period of time was when I was really getting interested in art. That was sort of the thing that gave me, I wasn't going to come in there and be the new outstanding sports star or anything like that. I played I played football and I played basketball, mostly kept a bench warm. But it was a time of a lot of change through there. New school, new people. Hormones kicking in, trying to get your confidence about you. And, like I said, art was my ability, and that was one of the things that kind of gave me a little bit of something there.
An identity. A lot of times, those middle schoolers,
and get noticed for what you've done.
High schoolers, you wanted to be the art guy. Somebody else was the football guy, so you're positioning yourself there. I'm going to be the art guy.
Yeah, and I got out of a lot of classes because teachers would want to borrow me to do a bulletin board or something like that. I had I guess it started at Broadway. I don't remember drawing anything specific at Broadway or doing things there, but I remember we had a substitute teacher one day, and we were on the way back from lunch, and I was coming up the sidewalk, and the teacher came out the door with two little girls, and one of the little girls pointed at me and said, "That's him, he's the one, he did it." And the other one, "Yeah, he did it, he's the one that did it." And I was like, "I did not, I didn't do nothing." And the teacher was wanting to know who had drawn a picture that was on the bulletin board. And I went into immediate denial as soon as they pointed at me. But when I got to Boone Trail, my dad had a cousin. He wanted us to start the first of the year, and the house wouldn't be ready to move into it until December. So he had a first cousin who taught at Boone Trail, Miss Vera McLeod. And she was an accomplished artist. And I can remember she and her sister lived together. And the place they lived was sort of magical because they had a working windmill that pumped their water. And we rode with her. But going to her house, she was always showing us paintings and things she had done. And I think that kicked up my interest in it a little bit, too, that I had that time with her, because after school, I would go to her room to wait for her to go home, and she'd always get me paper and stuff to draw. But I started making friends, and these are friends that have, stuck with me, through it all. In fact, I talked to one of my close friends, well, two of them today. I called Reg Kelly, talked to him. Interestingly, at Boone Trail, because it was in the Mamers community where our church was, I already knew a lot of the people that were at Boone Trail. And I'd say probably a third of them, maybe a fourth of them, went to church with me. So that was interesting.
Your parents probably had a discussion about that at some point. Hey, we're going to be uprooting him from one school to another school. But it's going to be a lot of kids that he knows there from church anyway. Yeah, that's true. And so we, like I said, hormones kick in, you start noticing girls and talking to girls more than you had before. And that was the period, kind of going through that little awkwardness of, all those little things that all of us go through as we're making these transitions or passages in life from one place to the other. It was
it was a good school. There were, I think, 45 in my graduating class, if you can imagine that compared to the schools now. How many were in your graduating class, do you recall, in South Johnston?
High school?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, probably 400, 450, 500, something like that.
So you had, what's that, 10 times as many. We had 45 in our class. The farm was another side of it, too. My dad, where we had a chicken houses at Broadway, and a big chicken house, and we sold eggs. The farm, my dad raised soybeans and tobacco and cows. I grew up with a unique bunch of guys down there at Boone Trail. One of the things that people still remember, and will talk to me about when we have reunions or when I talk to some of them, was Dad was always kind of in a hurry trying to get things done, and he took the quickest route to get something done. Like if he wanted to send a soybean field after the soybeans been cut and let the cows graze it, he would just take tobacco sticks and nail insulators to it, run up an electric fence. And as a result, termites would eat the tobacco sticks and the fence would fall. And so it was this one period of class that every day in that class, it seemed like the intercom would come on and the principal would say, "So Ormsby, yes, sir, do you have Ron Sloan?" The first day it was his mother's here to get him. And then the next time it was his mother's here to get him, the cows are out. He clarified why. And then, then the next day, it just came down to, "Do you have Ron Sloan? The cows are out." And and it really was funny that you'd hear, "Miss Ormsby, do you have Ron Sloan?" And all these guys would start, "Roll 'em, get them doggies rolling, roll high, get 'em up and get them going." And they would do that Rawhide theme song, which was a popular show about a cattle tribe. I'd be going down the hall. It wasn't funny to me then. It was like, oh, God, I hate those cows. It was embarrassing, but yeah, as I was going down the hall to the staircase, I could hear, the snap whips cracking, and and they were just into it, just singing to the top of their lungs. And
I think what's funny to me is that Grandma would come to the school and pick you up to take care of the cow problem. Was this something that, did Uncle Eldon ever have to go take care of the cows, or were you the cowboy?
I guess that may have been after he had gone to college, because he's 3 years older than me. And I remember that's when we had...
So this would have been in early high school.
Yeah. And my dad had bought a second car. We always had one car, and he had it on the mail route. But he had bought a second car, an old Dodge Lancer. And then when that car gave out, he got a friend of his, Mr. Cameron, that was the grocer. His brother, Norman Cameron, was into Mercedes, really into those. Before anybody knew what a Mercedes was, it certainly wasn't considered a luxury car at that time. It was just a kind of an odd car. But my dad knew a lot about them and read about them, and so he bought a 1958 220S. And it's really a car I would love to have today. But that was the car that, she'd come to pick me up on every day. Little black Mercedes. And that was the car I drove mostly dating during that period. But at that time,
Get
Mercedes...
picked up in the Merc.
Yeah. But like I said, it just looked like an old car to people, because they had, it had the running lights and the vertical grill and all of this stuff. It was really looked outdated, I guess, because of the war. They didn't move forward as fast in their styling with Mercedes at that time, but they were just a well-engineered car. And my dad was fascinated for that reason, and actually thought it might last longer on a mail route. So he bought a used one from Norman. But it turned out it had an electric shift, it was a 4-speed on the column without a clutch. When you touched the gear, it engaged the gear shift, it engaged the clutch hydraulically. And but that thing was always giving problems, so it never worked out on the bow route. But that's what she picked me up, and she'd take me back. I'd have to go get new tobacco sticks and insulators and put the fence back together and get the cows in using buckets of molasses feed. You know, I came to really despise those cows, this one in particular. Dad named all of them, and this one was Bucky Boy. And it was some kind of Holstein cross. And that cow's IQ was probably in the negative. I
want to point out that there have been several times in the course of this podcast that you've not been able to recall somebody's name, an actual person, but you remember Bucky Boy.
I remember Bucky Boy, yeah. Bucky Boy created some memorable things for me, and the gates were not really gates. It was strands of wire hooked to these plastic handles that had springs in them that you could hook into a loop to close the connection for the electricity to go through. And you'd take those 2 strands of wire and unhook them and open up a 20-foot space for the cows to go through, and all the cows would go in except Bucky and Dixie. And one of the other of them...
Probably because Bucky was a bad influence on Dixie. I think Dixie probably would have been fine if she hadn't gotten in with the wrong crowd.
Probably so. Though Dixie had sizable horns, and I did throw her one time. She made me mad. She kept butting the bucket that I had to feed in, and I grabbed her by the horns and twisted like you'd see them do on the rodeos, and sure enough, she just flipped right over on the ground. I was afraid then that I'd killed her or something when she hit the ground, but and I was going to have to explain that. Well, this particular day, I had left school to the tune of Rawhide, and I get there and I get the fence put back together where to keep them in there, and I'm trying to run the cows, get the cows in through that gate, and I got them all in that particular time using the molasses feed, but not before Bucky went over there, balked, and just locked down hooves, wouldn't go in. And I went over there with the bucket trying to get him in, and he turned and ran from me, ran back out in the field. Then he circled around, came back to the fence, and went through the fence and broke down 3 more things trying to get to the feed bucket. He broke 3 more tobacco sticks. So you can imagine how I was feeling about him about then. And
so apologize, we were having some technical difficulties there, cut out in the middle of the story, but we are going to... Yeah, there's a little bit of a delay, so I'm going to have to say something, and then there'll be a little bit of a pause, and he'll pick up. So we were in the middle of talking about this cow story that Dad was telling, so pick it back up with him really upsetting you.
Yeah, he ran out in the field, as I was saying, or circled around behind me instead of going through this huge opening I had for him. Moved downfield about 30 yards and broke off 3 more tobacco stick fence posts, pop, 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 going in back into the fence. Now, by then I had the electricity back on it, so I could hear it bzz, bzz, bzz on him as he was going in. And that just infuriated me because he's creating more work for me. But, also what kind of idiot would avoid an opening in the fence and go through a fence getting shocked. But anyway, he got in, and then I went back to fixing the fence. And as I got the last post back up, of course, I'm having to go up and unplug the fence and then come back and work and go back. And as I'm getting the last fence post up, I hear the distinctive sound of tobacco sticks breaking again, and I look, and he's on the opposite side of the fence going through, breaking down fence posts going into the woods. And that was just it. Something fried in my brain, and I went running to the house, and I was like, I want to kill him. I want to kill him, I go in the house, and I grabbed my granddaddy's old double-barrel 12-gauge shotgun, and I went to the drawer where I knew there were some old paper shells that were probably antiques, and I stuffed them in there. Of course, it had birdshot in it, which wouldn't have done anything, but I run out of the house, and my mother's calling to me.
I'm not sure that we picked up anything after the cow, the middle part of the cow story, so you're probably tired of telling this story at this point, but picking back up, it's just one more way. Bucky's revenge. He's coming back and making you have to tell this story three different times. But
okay, so I when he breaks through the back of the fence while I'm fixing the front of the fence, that was the last straw. And I went to the house, and I was so mad, I was just in tears, and I went in the house, and I think I shocked my mom, because I think that was the first time I ever said a bad word in front of her. And I said I was going to kill that blank cow. And she was kind of shocked from that, and didn't stop me initially when I grabbed up the shotgun, which was my granddaddy's Remington, which was probably a Civil War era. And of course, it had Damascus steel, which I know now you should not shoot with modern shells, but that wasn't an issue because the only shells in the house were about as old as the shotgun, the old paper shell. And I grabbed up a handful of those. They had birdshot in them, which would have done nothing but aggravate him anyway. But I run down, and he had run up beside this little path that went into the woods there that you could drive a tractor down. And he stopped. I caught up with him, and I was standing there, and I was holding that big gun up. It had a little brass bead on the end of the barrel, and I remember it waving around, and I was trying to hold it right on his eye. And I was like, I'm going to kill you. You just take one more step, I'm going to blow your brains out. I was just venting to this, I mean, I was intense, too, and I had never fired a shotgun. I was probably 14 or 15 at that time. Anyway, he's standing there, he's blowing. I guess he's a little bit excited because he had now fried his butt twice on the electric fence. And he was standing there, it wasn't probably 20 feet from me. And then he decided to go on further into the woods. And I had pulled back had those old curled hammers on that thing, and I had pulled back one of those and had it cocked. And when he started moving, I swung it up right in front of him and pulled the trigger. And the ground just exploded. I went flying backwards. He reared up like silver. I mean, went up on his hind legs with his front legs going in the air, and goes over on his back. Well, I knew then I had killed him because he just went all the way over and landed on his back with his legs up in the air. And I was coming to grips with the fact I just killed a cow. Mom says, "Kill them all! Kill them all! There's 2 more out here. There's 2 more got out." And I was like, oh, and I kind of sobered up from my fit of anger. And Mother's standing out in the backyard there, pointing out cows to her left that had come out through the gate where I hadn't put it back up. And kill them all, just kill them all, get rid of all of them, kill them all, And I was traumatized enough that I was going to have to dig a hole that big and bury that cow before my dad got home. But the cow rolled over and got up and ran back into the pasture. And when he did that, I was so relieved at the fact that I had not killed him that I got up and repaired the fence the rest of the way around. But Mother did get out one more thing. How are you going to explain this to your daddy when he gets home? And that was kind of sobering, too. But then I pointed out that Bucky was still alive. Well, just like I just now explained it, and how mad I was. And
were you actually intending to kill him when you aimed?
No, I pulled off of him, in front of him, at the last second. Just going to scare him, stop him, shoot right in front of him. Because I had the little bead right on his eye. But when he started moving, I swung the gun right in front of him. I probably got a few pellets in his nose I never examined. But I know the ground right in front of him just blew up like a landmine.
Did Bucky ever give you any trouble from then on? Or did you have a new respect from Bucky?
I don't really recall any instances with him after that, so that may have been the case. But My mother, it was a wonder that she would even eat beef after that, because, I come to realize it was more of a hassle for her than it was for me. At least I got out of school. I just had to listen to that song. But I had tried to get Dad to promise me that whenever he decided to take that cow, have it slaughtered, Bucky Boy, that they would let me kill him. But of course, that never happened.
Well, back away from the cattle and on to the real humans. You mentioned a teacher there that was your dad's first cousin that kind of helped with the artistic influence. Were there other teachers, or were there other adults, family members that you recall during this period of time, kind of helping you come to grips with who you were and be mentors or anything of that nature?
Yeah, as I got into high school, I guess it was about my sophomore year in high school, we got a sophomore, junior, we got a new ag teacher, and he was a young guy. His name was Gary Coble, and he was right out of college. I think we were his first teaching job. He was really a strong influence on me. He was a really good teacher. He taught things that were interesting. He taught auto mechanics. He taught carpentry. He taught horticulture. He coached football, basketball. He had this knack for finding something good in everybody and putting them to work. And he had a 62 Corvette that I thought was the prettiest thing I'd ever seen. A little 62 Corvette convertible, white with red interior. And he would do things like go to the state vehicle auction, and he bought a 56 Chevrolet truck, and we brought it back and we rebuilt the brakes on it, rebuilt the engine, put a new clutch in it, and then we got the dents out and everything, did body work. And I remember asking him, how are we going to get it painted? He said, what do you mean, how are we going to get painted? I said, who's going to paint it? Thinking we'd have to go to a body shop. And he goes, you going to paint it? I said, I don't know how to paint. I said, I can't do that. He said, when I get through with you, you're going to be an expert. He had taught us how to weld, and do all this stuff. And sure enough, he had me out there with a paint gun and a compressor and showed me how to use that thing. And I still use the techniques that he taught me when I'm painting things now, even with a spray can. But he'd work with us. We'd come back up to school on Saturdays and work on projects with him that he had us into. And we restored an old boat that somebody had abandoned, and we rebuilt the outboard engine in shop class. And it was a wooden boat body, and we did repair on that in our carpentry class, and then we fiberglassed it, and we reupholstered the seats in it and everything. And then we went to FFA camp, and we forfeited all the events, the competitions down there, and he taught us how to water ski. Well, he taught himself how to water ski first. We operated the boat down there at White Lake and got him up. Then he had all of us water skiing before it was over with, and we pulled the boat with a pickup. But during that process, if we needed a part or something from Lillington, he would throw me the keys to that Corvette and say, Sloan, go down to Napa and pick up so-and-so. He'll have the part for you there. And I can't imagine him throwing me the keys to that Corvette to drive to Lillington. And, of course, I drove a school bus, so I was used to driving a straight drive. But just that trust that he put in me was a big thing. And then when we got the truck all fixed up and painted, he said, we're going to build some, in the carpentry class, he said, we're going to build some side rails for that truck. That was a project through several of the classes working on those side rails, and when we got through with it, he wanted a Pioneer painted on that. He said, Sloan, you're going to paint Daniel Boone on here. And of course, I used Fez Parker for my model and painted it on those side rails. I had white side rails on the thing with an oval with Daniel Boone's face on it. And that just felt so cool to get to do something like that, and then see it driving around to school and everywhere. And he would take us to the beach, and so 2-3 years we went down there to White Lake, and he even tried barefoot skiing. I've seen that man. I thought he was going to kill himself. He would just turn somersaults.
You said that he eventually had a skiing school, right?
Mm-hmm. And yes, he now owns it's Coble International Ski School, and he takes in students. It's huge. I forget how many lakes it is. Seems like it's about 12 lakes where he bought an old gravel quarry, and he's got this ski school over there, and he teaches people all over the world. They come in and and stay for weeks at the time, learning to ski. He just had this way of making people believe in themselves and believe that they could do. He used to say to me, Sloan, there's nothing in this world you can't do if you put your mind to it, son. That's all you got to do is put your mind to it, and you can do it. I did things like, it's a lot about if you trust somebody and they tell you that you can do something, it's amazing how powerful that is to making you believe that you can. And, you grew up watching me do stuff here at the house. I built the cabinets in the kitchen. I built the bathroom cabinets, laid the ceramic floors, all these things that I couldn't do. I thought about so many times, well, Gary said I could do it. I could do anything if I put my mind to it. And so I did, and restored this house and things like that. So he was a big influence on me. We fixed up took a 1950 Ford and cut the body off behind the driver's seat, put a platform on it, put it on a trailer, and took it down to the ferry at Willis's ferry down there at Oak Island. We took that over and loaded all our coolers and everything on that, and would go over there on Outer Banks and flounder fish and sleep under plastic. Take sheets of plastic and put on the beach and put a sleeping bag in it and pull the plastic back over you to keep the sand off in the wind. And that's how we started and ended up for years and years. We went down there and fished in October. And later on, Reggie Kelly and Bundy Collins, Larry Clayton, Keith Thomas, a bunch of us continued to go until probably 8 years ago was when we went the last time together. But, we graduated by then to pickup trucks with campers on them, and then one time a Winnebago that was rigged to drive over there, and then Reggie bought a place on the backside of at Gloucester. He bought a place on the intercoastal waterway there and had boats, and we would take our boat over there, and he kept trucks on the island. But all of that fun that we enjoyed way up to these years kind of came through Gary, really. He started us on it. And we did some crazy things because, he was, really, when you think about it, he was a kid himself. He was probably mid to late 20s when I graduated from high school. I came back. They had a little girl. He married Shirley, and I came back one weekend. My mother told me that they'd had a little girl. So I went up to the teacherage to see him, and he carried me back there, and he got the little girl out, laid her down on the bed, and he said, "Watch this, Bo," and he put his ends of his little fingers together and held them down in front of the little girl. Her name was April. And he said, "Watch this, Bo, she can already get up," and she grabbed his fingers with both hands. And he'd say, "All right," and he'd say the same thing he'd say to us when he was telling us to get up on the skis. I can't remember the word now, but it's something like, "Get up now," or something like that, when he would gun the boat. And he said that little baby, she was just a little baby, 3-4 months or something. Anyway, she'd grab that, and she'd lock her little legs, and he'd pull her up on her feet. And I thought, well, that's funny that it actually looks like she knows what he's doing. And he turned around to me and he said, "Bo, you mark my words, she's going to be the world champion one day." And I thought she probably will be. And years later, I was over at Mother's one Sunday, and I always hung out in the kitchen talking to her while she was fixing lunch and do what I could with her. And sometimes probably got in her way because she said, "Go down there and pointed the other end of the kitchen. She said, "Go down there and get that newspaper. There's something there I think you might be interested in." So, I walked down there. It was the News and Observer laying there, and it was a big picture, about like a 5x7 picture. And it was this young woman at about a 45-degree angle throwing up this wall of water that was way higher than her on a slalom ski. She was on a slalom ski. And the headline said, "Local girl wins world championship." I knew what it was immediately, and it was April Coble. I said, man, he made her believe it just like he made me believe it. And he wasn't a perfect guy, none of us are, but he was good for me. In a time when I didn't have a whole lot of self-confidence, he had a way of finding in every kid that was in there something that he was good at and focusing on that and building his confidence. And
now you mentioned how small the school was with a less than 50 graduating class, but I recall you saying that you were voted in as class president by the time you were senior. So at some point over the course of your 4 years there, you got fairly popular amongst your classmates, but it wasn't always the case. So what happened there? How did you find yourself changing over the course of your school career?
That again was an individual, and that happened earlier than Gary getting there. They kind of ran parallel, but because I was the new guy, I got picked on a lot, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, and it caused me to kind of want to, I don't know, I became a huge introvert. Just wanted to blend in to the walls or something. And, I had a lot of hand-me-down clothes because I had an older brother. If he outgrew them, I got them. They never had the trendy clothes and the Weechen loafers and things like that, because the shoes would get worn out. I wore glasses and just a lot of things that worked on my self-confidence. And then I had this brother that was ahead of me that was a really good-looking guy, and he was much more athletic, and he was really smart. He ended up being a National Merit Scholar and a finalist with the Moorhead Scholar thing and all that stuff. And teachers were disappointed in me because they were expecting that I was going to be, a reflection of him. And the dang unfair thing was he had a photographic memory. He could read something the night before and remember every detail of it, so he didn't even have to study. And with a lot of the classmates early on, because I was the new guy, they picked on me and just did stuff to have fun. But I was a bit of an introvert, and there was the group of guys that were all these popular guys that just seemed like clothes fit them like they did the models in the catalogs, and I was a little paunchy, and there was this one guy that was just really good looking guy, always looked great, clothes just looked great on him. His clothes didn't, I don't think he even had wrinkles, but it just looked like, all the girls thought he was cute as he could be. His name was Dickie Harrison. And he was a couple of years older than me, and I'd love to find him and tell him this sometime. But he was always so friendly to me. He would always speak to me and big smile and, hey, how you doing? And I realized I got to where I looked forward to seeing him. And I'd even go up the staircase at the far end of the building because of that, because that's where he came down from his class when I was going up. And it seems strange to even say things like that, but it just, I was in the 9th grade. Just having somebody talk to you, speak to you, smile at you, act like you mattered, it had an effect on me. And when I realized that I was actually doing things so I'd run into him, it hit me one day, dang, there are kids, they've got it worse than I have, and have been picked on worse than me. And I thought, if it means that much to me just to have somebody speak to me, talk to me, I wonder if there's something that it would mean something to them if I did. And I started kind of looking for these kids, and the ones that weren't the most popular, they weren't the greatest ball players and the best dressers and all that kind of stuff, and just started talking to them and, hey, how you doing? Just speaking to them. And it was the strangest thing how it changed me and how it had the same effect on some of them, I think, that Dickie had on me. And as you mentioned, my junior and senior year, I was elected, I think it was both years, as a class president, but I never put my name in. Somebody else
You were
put
the
my name
write-in
in.
winner.
Huh? Yeah, I was a write-in.
You were a write-in candidate.
Yeah, and it was student body president, but I was more surprised than anybody. In the process of that, it changed me. People say they can't believe that I was ever an introvert, but I had the joy of getting to know people, because I got to know these people as I spoke to them and talked to them, and I'd come out of class and say, "Did you understand what he was talking about on so and so?" And I made friends that I probably would have never made. Made friends with a lot of guys that, that I didn't know. I didn't go to church with and hadn't known before I got there, and became close friends with them. And gosh, they helped me so much with schoolwork. I remember one of the ones that I didn't know before was Steve Starlett. Steve would come over. I'd go get him, and we'd come to my house and study for exams and chemistry tests and stuff like that I wouldn't have passed if it hadn't been for him. And I've thought about why would he do that, and I think it was sort of like the way I'd have gone to help Dickie, just because he appreciated that I was his friend, and and he became mine. But along that time, I learned to just treasure friends, and like I said, it changed who I was, and that was probably one of the biggest things that happened to me, because otherwise, if that hadn't happened, and I went to East Carolina with, I went from a class of, a school that had 200 students in the whole school, in the high school, to one that had 10,000 students. Couldn't even imagine. I had more people living on one hall of my dorm, one floor of my dorm, than were in my whole high school.
And that's really a perfect segue into next week, because we're going to be talking about ECU. We are coming up on the end of time now, so I do have one last question for you before we wrap things up. Similar to the last question that we had last week about culturally, the 60s, even more so maybe than the 50s, was seen in America as a tremendous cultural time of change, to go from that Leave It to Beaver type 1950s thing to, by the end of the decade, you had the hippie movements and psychedelic stuff and all of that, and whether it be in people's attire and worldview and drug use and all of that, or maybe it's just music culturally. Do you recall in rural North Carolina, your little section at Boone Trail or around Broadway, Mamers area, what do you recall culturally from that time period? Did you see any shifts over those 10 years?
Yeah, I did. Not so much in high school with our lives, except the biggest change was integration, which
wasn't that in the late 50s that integration law passed?
It was actually when I was, well, they may have passed it, but when they really, from what I understood, to get it going, they would pay families, black families, to go to school, to switch and go to different schools to integrate, which must have been really tough to leave all your friends. I thought leaving Broadway was tough. Think about, going in, I was going into a place where I probably knew a fourth of the kids from my church, and these guys were coming into a school where they didn't know anybody. And they were just, and they weren't welcomed. And it was, I don't know, it was the first sort of sense of loss of innocence, sort of. Everything seemed so idyllic and perfect in life, I mean, not really perfect, but there was not much awareness of, I wasn't aware that
there were bad things happening too.
Yeah, most everything was good unless you did something that you got punished for, but didn't realize there were things that just really weren't fair. You just accepted things the way they were. Sometimes you question why. Why why when I go into J.C. Penney's are there two different water fountains, and different dressing rooms and things like that. But and I think there were like 5 or 6 kids from 2 different families that integrated. That was one of the first senses of things changing. Another thing that strangely stood out was I remember being on the ball field. This didn't have to do with the culture, but it had an effect on me. Was we were out on the ball field and saw this huge plume of black smoke off in the distance. And we all stopped and said, what in the world? Is something big burning? Because you could tell it was a long ways off, but it was just huge. And I found out later that it was the Broadway school had burned that I went to. And, I remember crying because of the books. It just broke my heart, the books in that library. And one in particular was called The Cypress Buck, that I loved it and loved the illustrations in it. My daughter years ago she'd heard me talk about it, and she found a copy of the book. It wasn't the same edition, but that was just a really sweet thing that she found that. Then ironically, her school burned one night in the library, and she cried over this book about a dog. And I found that book for her, but that was an impactful thing. And then I think the biggest thing was one afternoon we were going out to the school buses, and I think I had gotten on the school bus because the drivers would go out and crank them up early. And the buses fixed to take off, and then there was a big commotion, and the principal had come out and was talking to the teachers, and I could see all them running around, and everybody was looking around on the bus, what's going on? And then different ones started going to the different buses, and we were like, what's happened? And the principal came over to ours and stepped up in the bus and said, I'm sorry to have to tell you all this, but President Kennedy has just been shot and killed. And that was one of the most sobering things to me. It just felt surreal. You see things in the movies, and you see the bad guys get shot by the cops and things like that in movies and cowboy shows and all that stuff, but this was the President of the United States, and it was a strange, insecure feeling that came on me during that. And that was the first signs to me of a change in our culture and things becoming different, and it not being that it seemed like the bubble was bursting, sort of that, like I said, that loss of innocence or something.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That's all very insightful. I hadn't heard that from you, how you'd heard about the president's assassination. I hadn't ever heard that story before, and I hadn't heard your reaction to integration. You're right, that had to have been a wake-up call to a lot of white kids in rural North Carolina of like, oh, here's this, maybe everything's not perfect. Maybe there's another side to the story that we haven't been told yet, and you just kind of have to start thinking about things that you never had to think about before. So very valuable to get your perspective on that as a kid who lived through it. And we are out of time for this episode, so I'm going to have to wrap things up. I know that you don't have an entertainment recommendation because you didn't have one for last week's episode, and we're recording on the same day. But I do have another entertainment recommendation to share with everyone, and that is something I've got to give a shout out to the Huffmans, because they're the ones that they go to our church and they told us about this. But there's a show called On Patrol Live that is a police show that is several different departments across the country, and at 9 o'clock on Friday nights and Saturday nights you can tune in and see what these police officers are doing. And the reason it's Emily loves this show. Her dad is chief of police in Southport, so that's a multi-generational policing family, so I don't know that factors into it. She probably would find it interesting anyway. But it's the perfect. That's right. It's the perfect show to just sit and you kind of just let it play in the background. You can be reading a book, or playing with the dog, or having a meal or whatever, and just not really pay attention to it too hard. But then when something crazy happens, you can turn your attention to it and tune in. And a good example of that was toward the end of, I think, one of the episodes a couple weeks ago. There was a high-speed chase, which is already something you don't see every day as a normal person. There's this high-speed chase happening. It was supposed to be a traffic stop, and the person took off, and they're chasing this guy for like 15, 20 minutes and get several police officers involved. And he's on the highway, and he's off the highway, and he's back on the highway. And then you hear one of them say something like they know where. One of the police officers on the radio comes over, and they're kind of talking about where they are, and it becomes apparent that they know where they are in a professional sense. And they're like, I think he's going there. And it turns out he had turned off the highway and turned into the county jail and surrendered in the parking lot of the county jail. I guess he figured, I've been running and I can't shake him. So he got out of the car and he was like, look, I drove right to the jail for you. Look, I saved you some time. And he put his hands on, and the commentators on the show were like, well, we've never seen this before. But I just thought it was hilarious, because I'm thinking that's something stupid that I would do if I was stupid enough to get into a high-speed chase. I would think maybe I can save a little bit of face if I just drive myself to the jail. I'm trying to help you out. That's all I was doing. I was just trying to help you out. So that kind of that doesn't happen every week. Some weeks are pretty dull, and other weeks there's more stuff going on. But it definitely pretty often it portrays a different side of policing that is, in my opinion, a little more positive. And so
what network
I would
is
definitely recommend that. I'm glad you asked. You can see it streaming on Peacock. It's the Reels channel. Within the Peacock app, there's live channels, and it'll be the Reels channel on there. So anyway, thank you for joining us for this episode, and we will be back next week with a fresh episode, and it will be all about East Carolina and the college years. So we'll see you next week. Thanks for joining us.